We're back for another exciting episode of The Rest of the News. This is your co-host Matt Singleton and the guy with the most, Corbin Seavers.
You know, Matt, today I wanted to talk about several things, but one thing I wanted to talk about, and some people might consider it old news, is about the whole Joy Reid situation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she was, I believe she was on MSNBC. She's had a show there for a while. Black woman, to the left, to say the least. Some people might go as far as to characterize her as racist, because she likes everybody but white dudes who are heterosexual and Christian. And after the Trump victory, her viewership dropped by 50%. 50%. And I'm still looking forward to some people who would do some research on that and just like, what happened? Because that's a catastrophic drop.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting that specifically, apparently all that she had to offer must have been for that election, for her to go half of the audience.
Yes.
Half the audience disappears.
She was definitely part and parcel in the forefront of the hate Trump, hate orange man, the whole Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah. Now, do you think that this was her followers who got tired and said, okay, I'll catch you later because this is all you offer me anyway? Or was these people who were like, maybe some people who were in opposition to him, or in opposition to her, and just saying, okay, so we're done with you?
I think it's some of it's the first part, what you said.
Mm-hmm.
I would hope and pray that it also would be due to these folks saying, hey, wait a minute. You painted this picture.
Yeah.
You said that this Kamala Harris is going to get it. She's going to kill it. You said this about this man. You said he was a Nazi, etc.
Yeah.
And then what happens? He gets the popular vote. He gets the popular vote.
Yeah.
And then he gets the electoral college. So despite all that negative stuff they said about this man, he was every phobic imaginable, particularly a racist, the whole 9 yards. And yet he still won the election. And
how far can you take a idea of somebody? Not just the person, but the idea of them. How far can you take that? And I think that once they, with Donald Trump, you can be. I've been suspicious of Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
There are things you could be suspicious of him. He's got power. How did he get that power?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he's done this. How did he get that? But then when we say, okay, this is a rich guy, therefore he slaughtered 6 million people in an abandoned warehouse. Then you kind of say, hold on, what about evidence and reality?
Yeah, I think that I'm not saying this so much about the viewership that Joy Reid lost, but I do think that those types of questions obviously started hitting a lot of people within the black community. Because one, the polling stated that 35% of black male voters, went for the Trumpster. Two, he got some interesting black male endorsements, in the popular arena. Three, he got some black males who basically refused to go whole hog with Kamala Harris, to the point to where, so obviously those numbers are there because they had to bring out a retirement.
Yeah.
Obama, and Obama was chastising. He wasn't chastising all black voters, and he wasn't chastising black female voters. He was chastising black male voters.
Yeah.
Why? It wasn't just this thing of, we suddenly hate, we're suddenly sexist, misogynist, and we hate black women. I know some people might be sort of surprised to hear this, but every black guy I know has a mother. So he has some sort of intimate relationship with a black woman.
Yeah.
And the majority of black households, at least in major urban areas, are female-led.
Yeah.
So so anyway, let me stay on track.
Well, the male-female...
So let me stay on track. So it was obvious that narrative that they were painting,
yeah,
the what do they call the legacy media, wasn't hitting with a lot of black guys, and I think part of it was because of just reality.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things they well, this is contradictory. He one time won an award with Rosa Parks.
Yeah.
Up in Manhattan.
Yes.
Hop, skip, and a bump from Harlem.
Was it Jesse Jackson?
Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton initiated it.
Yeah.
So that narrative wasn't hitting with a lot of the brothers.
Yeah.
All right. But let's stick with Joy Reid here for a minute. Her viewership, I think what you said and other things caused for the drop. But here's what I want to say to first black youth about Joy Reid. Joy Reid got her butt bumped because she did not own her show. It was somebody else. It was a bunch of liberals who owned her show. And the liberals were saying, girlfriend, we can't carry you anymore.
Yeah.
We can't carry you anymore. It's not about what you're saying. It's about, money, but money connected to consumers, eyeballs on the screen.
Yeah.
And so even the liberals, the white liberals and the black liberals who needed to give her those eyeballs on the screen weren't doing it anymore.
Yeah.
It dropped 50%. So the higher ups, who are libtards, said, baby, you got to go. Of course, they didn't fire all the loony left blacks on that show.
Yeah.
On that station, whatever. Just her. Said, you got to go, baby. You think. But here's what's important for young black people to understand. If you own your own stuff, you can't be fired. You can lose it. You can lose market share. You can come unprofitable, but you can't be fired.
Yeah.
Tyler Perry cannot be fired. I don't like what Tyler Perry does. I think a lot of it's funny, but the point is Tyler Perry cannot be fired. Why? He owns his stuff.
Yep.
Oprah Winfrey, in my strong opinion, she's off the rails. But she cannot be fired. Joy, she was fired.
Yeah.
Why? She didn't own it. Young black people, you gotta, we are living in a free market capitalist society. Nothing wrong with that. That's wonderful. But if you're not playing the game, if you're not playing by the rules, you're not going to be successful in it.
Yeah.
You're not going to be, of course you're going to have less wealth. Of course you're going to be higher unemployment. Because you're not playing the game of free market capitalism.
Lately, I've got a project right now, and lately I've been studying Thomas Sowell's book, White Liberals and Black Rednecks. And in it, he talks about, he gets after the black community about that they chastise the middleman. Okay? And so basically in the civil rights days, at first there was a good relationship with the Jews and the blacks, and then all of a sudden, they were like, okay, we're suspicious of the Jews because they're money handling and stuff like that. So what happens? They get rid of the Jews, go to the LA riots, and what happens? The Koreans are doing the middleman job because the Jews are out of there. So they're doing the middleman job, and we hate the Koreans now. Yeah,
burning their shops down.
So they have a suspicion. I mean, you think about the middleman in, like, what was that barbershop movie?
Oh, yeah. Ice Cube and all.
Who's the middleman there? He's like, hey, he's the elite, he's the hustler. So the only middleman in there is the hustler. And so they just chastise this valuable part of the economy.
Yeah. And I think the larger issue is really from what we call the so-called modern civil rights movement, particularly from about, I would say, the 1970s forward. Black folk, we were being pushed towards saying the government is going to be your liberator. The government's going to be your savior. The thing you got to do is elect this black guy, and all these great things are going to happen. Only thing you got to do is elect this white liberal in the White House, and all these great things are going to happen. Only thing you got to do is elect Obama. King Jr. is the dreamer, and Obama's the dream. There were literal T-shirts like that.
Yeah.
Oh my, paradise. Government. Folks, we live in a free market economy. We live in a free market economy. Secondly, you need to stop. This is where the Republican Party really needs to do better in communicating to black folk. Look, you know better than us, government ain't the way. We don't need more government. We need less government. We need government to get out of the way. When we talk about within the history of black folk in the United States, Booker T. Washington aligned himself with a Jewish philanthropist. He owned Sears Roebuck. He built over 5,000 elementary schools in the American South.
Wow.
Government didn't do that. So that speaks to what you said earlier about, hey, we had the blacks and Jews had this great alliance, this great relationship. Well, that went way back.
Yeah.
That wasn't anything new. You know, and then it was there in the civil rights movement, but we allowed this black left element, this leftist element within the black community, amongst black intellectuals, to say, oh, Zionism's bad.
Yeah.
How you can say that and then turn around and praise Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association is beyond me. Then secondly, Zionism's Israel's bad. Mm-hmm. Okay, Israel's bad. So we need to move away from that. Jesse Jackson, and there's a couple of other black so-called civil rights leaders, made it a point to rush to the Middle East to have their picture taken with Yasser Arafat. Mm-hmm. Yasser Arafat? Are you serious? Mm. Are you serious, Yasser Arafat? Who, by the way, is now viewed as a moderate in comparison to these Hamas people when it comes to anti-Semitism and terrorism.
Well, and you just go back to that, like, even if they have, like, a personal issue, it's like, okay, we don't like the Jews. You might want to notice that they're successful. They're really successful. And, like, if they've got something that's winning and working, you might want to pick that up.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. If I'm going to tell you something. If I was running a college basketball team and Rick Pitino was running a college basketball team, who are you going to look to learn how to win, how to produce a winning program? And who should I look to, at least behind closed doors, and say, Rick, how you doing? How you doing this, bro?
Yeah.
I agree with you 100%. I think there are two areas where more black, particularly black intellectuals, black thought leaders, have to create a realignment with the Jewish community in the United States of America and Israel. And it's on two issues in particular, education and economics.
Yeah.
Education and economics. I think Jews in America constitute maybe 3% of the population, and yet they're 13 to 15% of the professors on Ivy League campuses.
And the thing that's so ironic about it is that, African American religious people, which of course most African Americans are religious, they're very, big about the law. Mm-hmm. They love the Old Testament. They love the law. So, these are the things that just, they just need to be consistent.
But the problem is, and I honestly believe this can be traced back to specific time periods, there was a major, after the so-called modern civil rights movement in the United States, and again it became really pronounced in the 1970s, there was a clear ideological shift within the black community amongst intellectuals, so-called leaders, etc.
Yeah.
Clear ideological shift, and that included the ministers.
Yeah.
That included the ministers. Because if you look, let's bring it on home. Let's bring it on home. This is Louisville, Kentucky. Let's bring it on home. You go look at you look at the black pastors who have the largest congregations. More often than not, they lean to the left. More often than not, they do not really have a firm belief or firm preaching on the fundamentals of the faith, i.e., virgin birth, resurrection of the Lord, inerrancy of the Bible, etc. Therefore, they won't come out on standing firm on the scriptures against this transgenderism, abortion, etc. Won't do it. They'll sit around and whine and cry about, oh, Target's not doing this anymore. And yet we got thousands of black Christians in places like Nigeria and the Sudan being slaughtered. And they're not saying a word.
Yep.
They're not saying a word.
And that's a big truth that we're not really hitting. You understand that there's been genocide of millions and millions of African Christians. There has been enslavement of African Christians in the last 20, 30 years. The media is not saying anything. The media says, oh, we're your friend. Why? If you have a bond, if you feel that there is a bond between Christians, and especially Christians of color, shouldn't we be ringing the bell? If you care about human life, shouldn't we be ringing the bell? Why didn't we hear that from the BLM groups? They said Black Lives Matter. What about what was going on in the Sudan? Why didn't anybody say that?
BLM, as you know, flat out Marxist-Leninist organization. Mm-hmm. The two lesbians said that.
Yeah.
And then you have these pastors locally. I'm not just talking nationally. I want to talk about locally, and I'll start naming names in a minute. Oh, they're all for BLM. And I would say to them, but they tell you flat out they're a Marxist-Leninist organization. Or they said, at a minimum, two founders are lesbians, and they're trained in Marxism-Leninism.
Yeah.
Leninism. Flat out. Okay, so why are you as a Christian supporting that? I mean, are you not aware Marxism-Leninism just is all about atheism? And not just atheism, but what you just pointed out, the persecution of Christians.
Yeah.
All right? So, what's the deal? No, I'm not expecting BLM to say anything. But I am expecting black newspapers across the Amsterdam News, the Louisville Defender, the Chicago Defender, and many others. Our black journalist, black newspaper tradition goes back to the 18th century. No, I take that back. It goes back to the 19th century. Pre-emancipation.
Yeah.
Forward. And as believers, as Christians, we have that connection. One Savior. If nothing else, one Savior. If nothing else.
I do want to say, though, because I know this. I was listening, I believe it was Ricky Jones. He was speaking over at Simmons.
He's a minister's son.
Yeah, he claims that, the entire movement, all the BLM, all the DEI, all the Marxism and stuff, that it was inherently, that it had no connections to Europe, that it was entirely from ancient African American roots.
Well, I don't know about ancient African American roots, maybe some ancient African roots. But, my only response to, first of all, I'd say let me talk quickly about Dr. Ricky Jones, because I know some people may have a misconception about how I view him. I deeply respect him as an intellectual, but I think maybe I only agree with him about 1% of what he's ever said. And I've followed him since he's been in Louisville. Maybe 1%. Maybe 1%. And but he is part of that, which you might call that radical tradition within black intellectual thought. He is part of that. He's that Monroe Trotter of that tradition and all. Well, but what he said about DEI having roots in be quiet. That's absurd. Makes no sense. Folks, and again, I don't mean to be disrespectful towards you, Dr. Jones. I really don't, but I just have some real firm disagreements with you. Here's what I say to folks who are listening. Read Antonio Gramsci, Italian Marxist, if you want to understand DEI. Read Herbert Marcuse, an American Marxist, if you want to understand DEI and all that kind of stuff. All right? And then study Mao's Cultural Revolution. And then you'll see the consequences of those ideas. All ideas have consequences.
Yeah.
And you'll see the consequences of those ideas.
And the thing that I worry about, and this does transcend not just this issue of race or anything like that, the academics, so many people are just not well educated, and they don't use this thing we have called a public library. You have all this information available, and yet we have these gatekeepers, and they will reinterpret history so that you don't learn the history, and so we don't see what's going on. You say, oh, okay, well, we paid thousands of dollars to go to this university, and now they're telling us this, and this must be the history, because why else would I got suckered into paying my life, savings? It's like, well, guess what? Okay, you got to check the facts. Okay.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because what you say is 100%. When I went to college, we had healthy, vigorous debates about all sorts of ideas, about everything.
Yeah.
But it was healthy, vigorous debates, and nothing was being imposed from the top down. If anything, sometimes our professors, after hours, after classes, would join us and going back and forth, and would make it clear to us, hey, just because I'm a professor, just because I got a doctorate, doesn't mean your ideas are invalid. You got a valid idea, bring it forth, and let's debate it, let's go back and forth. Berea College taught me how to think, not what to think. This is why I've been a chess coach, tournament organizer, etc., since 2010. What I like about chess, what I love about chess, why I'm so passionate about it, is because it doesn't teach you what to think, it teaches you how to think. It gives me an opportunity to be sort of like a Socrates. Why did you do that? Where's your thinking and went into that? Have you looked at this whole situation? Have you considered everything? Have you considered all the possibilities? And then every so often I have to say to students, I'm not saying this is find the right move or the best move or the wrong, whatever. I'm asking you, think, and then tell me how you reached the conclusions you did to do what you did, to justify to do what you did. I'm not seeing that in universities and colleges right now, and I'm shocked.
Yeah.
And I don't need to be paying somebody $20,000, $25,000, $30,000 a year to indoctrinate me. I freaking go to the Jehovah's Witnesses and get that free.
Yep.
And I think that's why you get these brothers like Charlie Kirk, white conservative. I think as far as he's only gone is high school, but he's self-educated. There's a word for that. I don't know what it is, but he's self-educated. And it's obviously self-educated because when you go to these campuses, he goes toe-to-toe with these students and these professors.
Yeah.
He goes toe-to-toe with them.
Every bit.
And he says to them, I don't think he says to them flat out, you guys have been indoctrinated, but he does sort of say to them, man, was this worth it? Paying the kind of money you're paying to be here? And yet you're saying things that you really cannot defend?
Isn't that kind of a big deal with Abraham Lincoln?
How
self-educated.
So? Yes, he was, wasn't he? And I tell you, there's so many other brothers like that. Malcolm X. People talk a lot. Malcolm X definitely that way.
By the way, there is a word, and it's a very hard word. That's why I'm having trouble with it. But yeah, there's a word for people
who are self-educated.
Yeah.
And really, if you look at the black population post-emancipation, once they stepped out, they had to figure it out on their own. They knew education was important, but they had to figure out on their own, well, how are we going to build this school, and how are we going to get these teachers, and what are we going to teach our young people, and then what are we going to teach them that's practical and applicable, and it's, they had to figure it out. The government did not. The feds did not step in and say, well, here, we're going to do this, that, and this. And yet today, we have, dozens and dozens of HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, and yet still, on the other hand, the literacy rate amongst young black males is abysmal.
Yeah.
That's a very odd contradiction.
You had just a brilliant point earlier, and I want to reemphasize this. If you are taught how to think critically in college, then, what are you taught for your master's and your doctorate? And, one day I want to get a doctorate, but, the thing is that, are you really being taught how to think anymore? Or are you really being part of a cult? Are you really kind of becoming insulated to where all your ideas are all around the same people and they're not really, experimenting with what's truth?
I don't know much about the pursuit of a doctorate, other than my father, before he died, he completed his doctoral classes. Then he was saying to me, now I have to, he had his thesis, and then he says, now I have to gather the research, the evidence to support my thesis, and then go defend it.
Yeah.
My ex-wife, she explained that to me exactly that way too. So I would hope that, on that doctorate level, more people are understanding a very simple thing. Okay, if this is your position, fine and good, defend it.
Yeah.
And defend it with something other than, oh, you're a transphobe, or you're racist, or you're ugly. Okay, I am ugly. I am an ugly transphobe, but still defend your position logically and sensibly why grown men who are pretending to be women should be in women's sports.
And that's kind of something that I've gauged in when it comes to worldviews, is that it's less and less about information, less and less about critical thinking, more and more about psychological attacks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's more about, we're trying to find ways to control you, and whether you give in because of fear or temptation or whatever, we're going to get you in line with us. We're not here to find the truth.
And didn't we not see that in practice with Mao's Cultural Revolution? It started on the colleges, and folks, we can talk for hours about the flat out atrocities committed under Maoism in China. And then, but I'm only pointing out one specific thing. The Cultural Revolution was started on the colleges and universities. The Communist Party started on the colleges and universities. And they encouraged these young people to go out, engage in psychological stuff. They were bringing people out, if you were wealthy or semi-wealthy, whatever, putting signs around them, putting them out in public and humiliating them, that kind of stuff.
And you just remember this. Not only was Mao a bad system, not only did they win the genocide prize, 60, 70 million people, more than any other group.
Yeah.
They're still around.
Yeah.
People can go on and on about how bad Hitler was and that's how it's over, but they don't bring up Mao.
Right.
Mao is not, hated like he should be.
Yes, absolutely. And let me just point out one thing. With a lot of black intellectuals, Dr. W. Du Bois, he loved Mao. And we have a school named after him here in the city of Louisville. And then on top of that, Du Bois never stepped foot in the city of Louisville. So why we have a school named after him, I don't know. But people like him, Du Bois, emphatic, the Black Panther Party loved Mao. They really adopted Maoism. In fact, their first major fundraiser was Mao's Little Red Book. They would sell it to raise money for the party. And they also went to North Korea because, communist China and North Korea had a tight relationship. And that's how they were able to get into North Korea. So that evil of Mao, that influence of Mao, it's been around for, like you say, it's still here.
Yeah. And
we don't have enough people, definitely within the black intellectual tradition, condemning that. Saying, "Oh, hold up now. We want to whine and cry about slavery. You compare that with Maoism, please. We definitely need to be whining and crying about that nonsense, that filth, and how they help prop up North Korea, which is in itself just a state of madness there. It's unfortunate.
All right, we definitely had a lot of stuff to go over, and we do have to bring more of the rest of the news, so we will see you for a later episode.